Bueno, buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. In the last part of today's session, so we will be talking about the report, our 10th Energy and Geostrategy report. We have followed the same structure of that in previous reports. As Inigo mentioned before, in this report, we include an interview with a relevant figure in the world of energy. In this year's report, the interview has been held with the Vice President of the government and also Minister for Ecological Transition, and also with members of the armed forces. And this year, there are three thematic areas: nuclear energy, renewable fuels, discussed by Berta, Cabello, and also Trevor Tombe from the Calgary University. He's in charge of the chapter about impact of energy prices on international economy. And we will briefly discuss the methodology that he uses to analyze the energy trading movement, and also two chapters on the space, one about the Caucasus area that was in charge of Felipe Sánchez, and then another chapter about energy strategy in Latin America, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, and Argentina. Our speakers will address in Spanish, with the exception of Trevor Tombe. We can all address Trevor in Spanish during the Q&A, and he will answer in English. Before I give the floor to the authors and co-authors, every year I make a recap of the relevant events that have taken place in the world or the field of energy and geostrategy. I will briefly discuss some of them, as many have already been pointed out. Well, I will refer to some of them that are kind of, a bit controversial and which are good to generate a debate. First of all, and as been mentioned before by General Takova, the effects on the geopolitical aspects of the Ukraine war. The first controversial aspect is the potential impacts of the war of Ukraine in energy transition. I'm saying that this is controversial as there are two different approaches, opposite approaches. First of all, we have the optimistic one by Fatih Birol. He's the DG of Energy, and he said that would be highly positive as this will promote the investment of decarbonizing technologies that would also promote and foster energy transition. And then there is another negative outlook. Well, energy security. We have talked about the energy trilemma before, and so therefore, given what priority to energy security is translated into an increase on the use of fossil fuels. Germany and China have increased prices of fossil fuels. They have increased the use of coal, and they continue to use coal for power. So we also have the case of the US. We have the Inflation Reduction Act promotes clean development of clean technologies. But U.S. has also increased explorations of gas and oil. But if we want to achieve carbon reduction emissions, no more gas and oil explorations will take place. So therefore, if both things will take place, there will be an overcapacity. So therefore, either the decarbonizing objectives are not met, or there will be challenges investments, for instance, with regard to coal power plants in Asia. So, which is very dangerous to give that to the Chinese and to the Indians, telling them to close down or to phase out coal power plants, to close them, to speed up the phasing out. That will be very, very challenging. Well, most likely, a mix of both things will happen. Yet a future problem regarding regulation opens up. Another topic which is associated to the energy impact of the war on Ukraine that can be discussed is the deglobalization, defragmentation approach, decoupling. Will it continue to increase? Will be halted? What will happen there? We just don't know. There will be decoupling, uncoupling of energies. It is clear, we are all clear about that. This is due to sanctions levied on Russia. There will continue to be an uncoupling, energy uncoupling, but not only from the viewpoints of supply flows, but also from the technological viewpoints. U.S. is supporting an industrial policy which fosters in-home facilities. Shoring also takes to distribution of industrial facilities. And Europe is trying to react not only through a defensive strategy as high as that of the US, but we are seeing that China is already ahead in many of decarbonizing technologies and also control of critical materials. There may be a coupling. When that happens, when we are talking about rare earths, China controls the production of mining and processing of rare earths, cobalt, nickel, lithium. China controls not the mining there, but the processing of those rare minerals, or rare earth minerals. So there are those who say that everything will go back on track, but I do think that logistics of supplies and delocation of facilities will also be associated with another controversial aspect, which are sanctions. Having sanctions rightly structured, well, there is an interesting data regarding Russia. Russia has increased its revenues, well, because the demand has gone down, or supply has gone down, and then prices have gone up. I'm not talking about financial sanctions and long-term sanctions regarding making Russia or harming Russia but from the viewpoints of revenue. Russia has not been impacted.
There are very important factors, and I'm going to be very quick about them, and they refer to the differences that exist internally within Europe, which are caused to a certain extent, or they're made more patent by the Ukraine war and the energy crisis that has taken place due to the war. The interventions in prices, well, not everyone has done the same thing in Europe. There have been different opinions relating to this. The concept related to the reform program of the electric industry, despite the program which was presented by the European Commission, which is there was no unanimous vote at all related to that. So we've seen a lot of different divisions between the optimal mix in the energy sector, and also there's a controversy about the use of nuclear energy. But I think we'll probably be able to talk about this during our debate. So, what is the strategy related to promoting hydrogen? Well, there's big difference in opinions there. And what sort of hydrogen are we talking about? We have to obviously look at the development of that and how we're going to focus the promotion of infrastructures for a hydrogen market. What horizons are we considering? And the European Commission has thought about the progress in hydrogen unrealistic. But this is another subject that we can say there's a lot of difference of opinions related to that issue. But these are just suggestions of things that I think, well, I don't necessarily want to say they're in conflict, but should we say that there's a lot of controversy related to them, and I'm sure they'll come up during our debate. Anyway, without further ado, I'm now going to start talking and giving the floor to the different authors, the 5 of them who are here today, and they've had an important part in this edition of our report. Like other years, the system will be following. I am going to ask each one of the authors a question, not so that they give a summary of their work, because you will see you'll be able to see the summary in the book that you will be given as we leave. But there are other timely issues which are very interesting. And as I say, we're not giving them a lot of time to develop their suggestions and ideas. So now, let's move on to this part of our presentation. We're talking now about nuclear issues, which was the article written by Cayetano. Cayetano, obviously, most of your presentation related to nuclear fusion. However, there's one issue that you don't spend so much time on, but it's also very important, which General Jacob has talked about with the nuclear fusion. To what extent do you think nuclear fusion is part of an objective that can be reached as an alternative? And what is the degree of realism in relation to the announcement made in the United States with the progress? And I'm sure you were there at the thing. You were at that organization at the time, the CIEMAT. And so what do you think about the possibilities offered by nuclear fusion? Well, have you said? Well, first of all, Claudio, thank you very much for asking me to be here to participate and in the drafting of the report with regard to this issue. Well, I tend to talk about nuclear fusion, but it's not unique. There are different technologies. But I think this is the one that currently is being used, and it produces energy which can be sold. Fusion is a project. The technology of the fusion is diabolic. So, for my scientific information, I'm interested in things like, which is, this fission and the fusion. But I think that to master this technology in a systematic way so that it has an impact on industry, I think it's a long way away. I'm convinced that it will be mastered. I'm sure this technology will be mastered, but I am reasonably convinced that I won't see it. I think what we will need is at least a generation, or maybe more than one generation, to see it working fully. ITER, which is a world project, which all the big countries in the world participate with an enormous investment, is just an experiment, which is an experiment which is prior to the design of a new, should we say, reactor. It hasn't started yet, but we haven't started doing experiments. We think they'll take about 15 years to do these ITER experiments. And the only thing we've tried to demonstrate is that energy that you get from the fusion reactions of the plasma when we're talking about 1 to 10, it's above the energy that is put into the plasma. But 10 is not much, because that energy comes out as calories, and then when it's transformed into electricity, you divide it then by 3, and all energy that is used in the plasma is just a part of the energy necessary to keep the machine up and running. There are lots of experts that say this factor, it has to gain a lot more. But at the same time, you have to study a series of materials that at the moment are unknown. We don't know anything about them yet, and they have to be able to support radiation of the neutrons mainly, as well as the heat to extract them from the plasma chamber, and also to regenerate tritium, which is necessary for the fusion. This is so on the long term, it's an issue which is called IFMIF, which is an international project for fusion materials, whose prologue, which is the Dones project, which will be built in Granada, but they still haven't started. So it's a group of projects which are complicated, expensive, which I think will take a long time, and they will need a lot of investment. And there's a lot of, should we say, grey matter, because we need a lot of researchers to be working on this investigation. So these energy issues, I think, are urgent. They're very pressing. We cannot wait for 1 or 2 generations for them to bear fruit. So I think it's going to be very difficult for the fusion technology to have an impact immediately. I think it can on the long term, but not at the moment, which is when we need this transition very urgently. Well, thank you very much, Cayetano. Previously, I forgot something, like always. What I want to say is you can write your questions on the cards that have been handed out. You can just send them up to the front, so you don't have to wait to the end. So we can include these questions when our panel members are speaking. So Berta, let's move on to you. When we're now talking about renewables, which is another issue that has a lot of internal debate in the European Union, electrification, for example, the generation mix, clean generation mix, and also clean fuels. That's another alternative, both for industry and for transport. Could you talk a little bit about the role of synthetical fuels for transport? I'm talking about, well, probably better talk about renewables. Well, thank you very much, Claudio. It's a true honor to be able to participate in this panel session and to this book. And also, I would like, first of all, to explain what renewables are for all of those who don't know them. These are products which, for users, they can't make a big difference between them, between the traditional fuels and the renewable fuels, but the raw material they're made from is renewable. So what does this mean? It means that basically we use waste from animal, organic wastes, from, I don't know, from forest materials, or even things that are in the air, these synthetic materials. And hydrogen is also renewable because it comes from the renewable electrolysis of water and from waste themselves. And this means that they have a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions between 65% on a minimum to even up to 110, which represents emissions that are negative compared to traditional fuels. So I'm telling you this so that you know that the role the decarbonization in transport has is a key role, because they decarbonate all types of transport in an efficient and quick manner, because you don't have to change the vehicle fleet. You can use the logistics that exist at the moment, and they can continue to do the current work. So now, what's our objective that we're trying to achieve? And companies like my company, which is Repsol, we have to have all the different alternatives for renewables, and I'm convinced that they will be part of this new energy mix. So this leads us to security of supply. So this helps the security of supply, because currently, for the time being and for the future, because we're diversifying these different energy sources, using on many occasions sources that are domestic, and we're supporting the necessary use of waste matters. Well, as you know, as a country, we are not fulfilling the waste objectives that we have to fulfill from the European Union. So we have to work on this to try and achieve the goals. So I want to offer two examples, which I think will be easy to understand. One is the use of cooking oil can be used for the production of sustainable materials for aviation and diesel, and it's being used as a raw material in some places. In Cartagena, we have a new project which are going to be started in the end of the year, and they're using raw materials as this used cooking oil. And to a certain extent, we're avoiding, as we say, this oil that is used for frying. Well, it will also save our system related to drainage. So until recently, we depended from the imports of Russian diesel in the European Union for all these different types of use. Something that's very important is biomethane for the use of purines from the agricultural world. And we wanted to reduce 30% of natural gas. We have depended on Russia for many years for this biomethane, in Spain even more. I said there's the primary sector is very strong and it's very important. So at Repsol, we have a project in Galicia which will allow us to replace 5% of the natural gas demand in that region. And so these examples show us how this will help us to improve our security of supply. And also in the future, and I'm going to be very brief here, I think we've already talked about this, the dependence on the batteries, on materials related to the batteries. And if we focus only on electrification, well, these dependencies are going to be more critical. If we have a more diverse mix with using all the different alternatives, well, our scenario will be a lot better, obviously. And to end, I would just like to see, I think that technology is progressing considerably. There are things that still have to be seen, but I think as a country we have an opportunity to grow in the reuse of waste and in renewable hydrogen, which I think as far as employment is concerned and the creation of value is very important. And what we need ensure that we need a regulatory framework that is open, inclusive for all different technologies, and it doesn't limit any of these technologies at all. It would allow us to go along this path, trying everything out. Okay, well, just to end the first part, I would like to give the floor to Trevor. Tom, I assume, Trevor, that you are connected from Calgary. Would like to give you the floor, sir. And I would like to ask you a question. This is probably not related to the general way of what you've written about, but I think what you've written about is something very original, which is to take into account the analysis of the energy flows, the global energy flows, not just exports of energy directly, but rather the export of the energy that is used and included in other sectors. It's embedded within other parts. So we say there are different countries that even though, well, they don't have the energy resources, so they don't, but they are countries who export and import energy, and they export a lot of products which are energy intensive. Trevor, so if you're ready, sir, and if you can hear us from Calgary, would you please explain the methodology you use, which in my opinion is a very new methodology for the specific flows. And if you could give us an explanation of the pre-war, should we say, period, or when this could be seen. Thank you very much. You have the floor, sir.
Sure, thank you. And it's an honor to be a part of this panel and to contribute to the book. And thank you as well for the opportunity to join you virtually this morning from Calgary and to speak about how energy shocks can affect national economies. So as you noted, there's obviously direct effects of rising energy prices, and we've seen considerable increases in prices starting in 2021 and especially accelerating in 2022 following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But how such shocks affect national economies depends on a lot of factors, and the direct effects are pretty obvious. You know, consumers in Europe, for example, spending between 11 to 12% of their overall expenditures on electricity, gas, and fuel for homes, as well as operating personal vehicles, and so that contributes to inflation and so on. And even for producers, direct use of energy in certain sectors is substantial, and so increases in prices will decrease activity there. But as you note, I think one of the most important and least broadly recognized aspects of energy trade globally is the complex supply chains that propagate energy price changes throughout the economy, often in complex ways. So what I use is some methods that have been developed now for several years to look at global value chains, thinking about how value added in different economies are embedded in the goods and services that are traded internationally. And I apply the same method to energy. So I think it's not exactly an innovation, but I think it is novel in this chapter and yields some pretty interesting insight, I believe. So first, I find that only about 14% of total global energy use is actually consumed directly by households. The rest is embodied in the goods and services that we consume. 29% of the total is within the final goods that we as consumers directly consume. And that means that 57% of total energy use is embodied within inputs, or inputs of inputs, or inputs of inputs and of inputs, and so on up the supply chain. So you have to think about the entire chain in order to fully appreciate the scale of the impact of energy shocks. It also means that we need to think differently and more broadly about how countries are exposed to energy shocks. So most countries are affected, for example, by electricity price changes in China, despite not directly importing from it or that particular energy source. And indeed, I find that China is among the world's top energy exporters when you consider this embodied energy trade flow, accounting for about 18% of the total, where direct energy exporters like Saudi Arabia matter a lot less, only accounting for about 2%. So the source of energy shocks can be very different than what we usually have in mind. It also changes how we think about which sectors are exposed to energy shocks. Some like auto manufacturing, machinery and equipment production, or textiles. These are sectors that are actually much more energy intensive when you look at their entire supply chain than when you just look at direct energy used in production. Even some sectors like hotels and restaurants, they're nearly as energy intensive when you look at their full supply chain as the mining sector is in terms of its direct energy use. So we need to think more broadly about that. I also use some methods to try and quantify how countries are exposed to foreign energy shocks. And of course, some countries are net energy suppliers, where they export energy directly or a lot embodied in goods and services. North America in particular is a net supplier, but countries like Japan or continents like the European Union, these are economies that are very heavily reliant, more reliant than previous measures suggest, on imported energy when you look at all of those embodied flows. So I suspect I'm running short on time now, so I'll just note that as the world becomes increasingly uncertain and energy supplies more frequently disrupted, thinking about these broader interdependencies will be increasingly important for policymakers. So I'll end here and look forward to the conversation.
Muchas gracias, Trevor.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Well, now let's move on to the more territorial-focused issues. So we have the Colonel, Mr. Felipe Sánchez, who dedicates a chapter to the new geostrategic position after Ukraine crisis, which is an area that we know very little about, which is the Caspian and the Caucasus area. And it would be an alternative supplier for Russia. So can you give us a bit more information about this Caucasian area, the Caucasus area? Yes, welcome everyone, and thank your team very much for allowing me once again to be here today to share here this work in public, and it's very interesting. And this year I talk about a region that it's not really of any new interest for the European Union, especially as far as energy is concerned. And this is the Caucasian-Caspian area. And I talk about the Caucasian area, but actually I'm talking about this very broad area that you can see here on the screen because it has a lot of hydrocarbons, especially the Caspian Basin itself, especially for oil and gas. Prior to the Ukraine war, this area supplied to the European Union more than 7% of the annual oil consumption and gas. These are not big amounts, but if you take into account that a majority of this supply goes specifically to specific countries, especially in the south and east of Europe, which is Bulgaria, Greece, and Italy. This is just to, should we say, name the most important countries that import this. But in general, we could talk about the fact that oil is supplied to Europe from two, should we say, origins, one from Kazakhstan and from Azerbaijan. And so it goes two ways. One way is through the pipelines, which go through the Russian Federation's Kazakhstan, and the others go through the Georgian territory and Turkey to the Mediterranean ports. And then they're distributed to the people who buy it. As far as the gas is concerned, there is one single supplier, which is Azerbaijan, and they supply to Europe via one of the gas corridors, which is a European project which was financed or supported by the European Union, and it will be fully functioning. Well, it started to be fully functioning in the year 2020, and it has three sections. One section that goes through the Caucasian area, and then it goes through the pipeline in the southern Caucasian area, and then we have another pipeline that goes through Turkey, and the last section that goes through Greece and Italy, which is a trans-Adriatic pipeline. So the European interest due to the Ukraine war on this area has considerably gone up over the last year, and thanks to that, diplomatic activities, they've managed to sign agreements, especially with Azerbaijan a year ago, or maybe a little less, to double the amount of gas supplies that will be exported to European buyers. So we can go from 10 BCMs per month. So there's certain difficulties on a technical level related to this. On the one hand, due to production, there's a lot of analysts say that Azerbaijan, between now and the year 2027, which is the date that the European Union has established to double the amount of production, we don't think they will go above 14 BCMs that will be supported. So we think they will only be 50% above what they're currently exporting. But there's another important thing, which is the capacity of the gas corridor, which will be at 100% of its capacity. It's possible to extend and expand everything, but it will require time and investment. So I would like to make reference to the dichotomy that Claudio talked about related to the possibilities to invest enormous amount in projects that could be really positive. So we're now talking about geopolitics, and here there are two factors that support this, Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. As we said, these are the main suppliers of oil, and they're a member of the OPEC+, which, as you know, they apply the policies to reduce the production, especially at the moment. They're 3.6 million barrels a day compared to the production in August in the year 2022. So, and they're going to maintain that to the end of this year. And it's not predictable for Kazakhstan or to Azerbaijan to change this consensus within the OPEC+ group, because they don't necessarily want to fulfill the requirements for increased production that the European buyers are interested in. But as we said, we've talked about the geopolitical aspects, and as far as Kazakhstan is concerned, almost all the exports to Europe goes through the Russian Federation. At the current time, it's being used on many occasions by the Federation route, and so they try and cut off the supply. They say it's for legal reasons or technical reasons, but basically they want to be very clear to Azerbaijan because they have got the key to allow. So they obviously have to allow the transport of this oil through their country. So this leads us to a very complex geopolitical situation on a regional level. And also it's framed within the current, well, the presence of Russia in the area, and also the Russian perspective of the Caucasian area is part of the security belt. And as we say, when we talk about, we don't know whether Ukraine shares this opinion or not, but as a consequence, they are prepared in Russia to guarantee that their interests are respected in that part of the world. And in fact, they militarily intervened, if you can remember, in the year 2008, before they intervened in the Ukraine. So, as we say, the Ukrainian war is distracting the attention from this area, and so therefore it means there are interests for other regional powers and global powers to increase their presence and their influence in this particular area. Between the regional countries, I would say Turkey and Iran, as you can see on the screen, they are trying to occupy specific areas. And, well, they're not actually empty areas. They look they're empty, but they're not. And they want to have strategic alliances. And they already have it with two countries in the area, Azerbaijan in the Turkey and Armenia in the Iran case. So both of these two countries have been at war for more than 2 decades. So therefore, this has, stimulated the fact that global powers are interested in this area. And we've said Europe has interest in that. And they're not just limited to energy, but they're also worried or concerned about the connectivity, either east or west. May they be opening a new market in China from this area? And above all else, the United States. United States are motivated geopolitically to intervene in this area. We consider that both the Caucasian area and the Caspian area towards Central Asia, well, behind that we have, China and Russian involvement. And so what we need and what is interesting to be present in that area, any type, even military precision. In fact, the United States are strengthening their military cooperation with all these countries in Central Asia. So if we now think about, we have a volatile, unstable situation which could replicate all the turbulences that we have seen and we are seeing, because there's big rivals between the big world powers. Claudio, well, this year, this chapter, like previous years, we haven't had a black swan. So therefore, I think, as I said, a few months ago, we did include our information. It's still valid today. So I hope you find it interesting to read. Thank you very much.
Now, moving on to another topic regarding alternative supply of gas and oil. I do think that you have a skeptical position regarding Latin American countries as suppliers of gas and oil to Europe. And so would you please tell us more about your position? Do you continue to be as skeptical as you were last year? So do you continue to share that view? So thank you very much, Minister, for giving me the opportunity to take part in this seminar. It is an honor to me to be here. Since when we finished our draft report end of January, I thought that perhaps by the time we will present the report, whether there would be any circumstances that would have impacted the the contents of our reports. When I looked into the topic, I could see that the efforts made by the EU in terms of finding alternative suppliers are more focused to Algeria or to the South Belt versus Ibero-American. And I wondered why. And that was what I researched on. When we carried out the research, the 4 countries that were researched, Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil, and Argentina, we can see that they have fully different circumstances. Starting off by the most northern one, Mexico says that exporting gas and oil is not suitable for them. It's not they say we are not going to buy oranges to sell oranges to buy orange juice. Regarding lifting of sanctions to Venezuela by the U.S., we are finding a different situation. In case of Brazil, oil coming from Quetzal, it's very, very interesting elements. Brazil had its route of exports to China, and since we finished the draft report and we have read in the report published in February, we are expecting to see which will be the role of China after the pandemic in terms of gas demands, and we'll see whether perhaps China will become a competitor of GLN gas in Europe. And as Brazil is a supplier of China, we could have there a clash in terms of oil and not in terms of gas. In case of Argentina, we can, regarding gas, well, there are chances there, but not in terms of exports, not yet. Argentina may have gas reserves, but it is not in a position to export gas, not yet. So therefore, I can see that Mexico and Brazil could redirect their oil flows to to the European Union if the EU so demands that. But that will never be the silver bullet that we need to replace Russian hydrocarbons. When we look at the front covers of papers, sometimes they are misleading. Because on the one hand, we say, okay, we see EU sanctions, but then it seems that the headlines say the opposite. So therefore, it is very important to read the text regarding sanctions. If we read about the package 5 of the EU, that is to say, restricting gas and oil, we need to look into the type of gas and oil that I'm referring to. Are we talking about the gas that is exported on maritime transportation, or perhaps through the pipeline and not GNL? So sometimes that misleading aspects, that sometimes when we give training, we are often asked that question. So we need to be clear, need to specify that, and we really need to look into the source. The source are the very many publications of the EU and to find out about the actual sanctions that the EU has levied. And now let us move on to Q&A. Well, this question is addressed, even if it doesn't say that it is for you, Trevor. Any of the panelists may answer the question or may add to the answer, but the question goes as follows. Is it possible to price barrel oil in yuans, or what could be the impact in other markets?
I think the response is a simple one that yes, it's entirely possible. I think this is going to depend on agreements made between buyers and sellers, and we're seeing lots of activity there, lots of moves in that direction in China and with other countries as well. I think it'll take quite a long time, if it ever actually develops that way, before alternative currencies are in any way even close to the liquidity that we see the US dollar have. Because when you switch to these other forms of settling transactions, it does come with a higher cost and in already pretty sometimes low margin trades. And so the US dollar's got that strong position that is likely here to stay for some time.
Muchas gracias. Una pregunta.
Now a question addressed at Pablo Ahedo. Potential impact of Latin American countries' exporters to China. What about China diverting exports to those countries? What could be the impact of it? This is precisely what I mentioned when we are talking about exporters and the countries that we have analyzed. We are talking about Mexico and Brazil. Brazil exports to China, and then, yes, of course, may be impacted by that. If we take a look at what the words of the Executive Director of International Energy Agency, China may have an excess of surplus need of gas and oil. So therefore, China may become a competitor, but well, there seems to be a trend in China to continue increasing that, especially now at the end of the restrictions due to COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a question which is not addressed at any of our panelists. It's about hydrogen and the role that hydrogen may play regarding competitiveness and well, the type of hydrogen that should be promoted. Green hydrogen, pink hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and other alternative fuels. And the person who is asking the question sounds a bit skeptical. Is there higher hopes than reality in terms of hydrogen? I think that all the panelists could answer that question. So, starting off with Berta. Well, regarding hydrogen types, I mentioned that in my presentation. We want carbon neutrality. At the end of the day, we want costs to be reduced. There are very many alternatives. Well, we have water electrolysis hydrogen with electric power, whether it is nuclear or renewable, but that is to say that does not emit any CO2 at source. And hydrogen could also be generated from waste, and we also have the blue hydrogen, which follows a conventional process. Hydrogen that is produced is stored and can also be used for the production of other products. Well, depending on the final use, final purpose, they all be part of that mix. European Union is favoring electrolytic hydrogen from renewable sources. So the last place we had nuclear hydrogen that was promoted, that was pushed by France, but actually it is being pushed that it is a way of generating demand for that renewable energy. There will come a time where we will need additional demand for it to continue, for those technologies to continue to be deployed. Hope of reality. What I can say right now or to date is that those who are consuming and using hydrogen as the industry, fertilizing industry, methanol industry, as well as other industry. We are large producers as well as consumers as well as large producers of hydrogen. In the transition, those industry will play a key role in making that a reality. At this point in time, we are moving at a smaller scale. We are conducting tests, and there are already projects, 100 megawatts projects, that will take place in 2025, 2026 will help us test reliability of the technology and would also help us reduce costs, as now there is a significant gap between fossil hydrogen, renewable hydrogen. There is yet a long way to go in terms of technological developments and efficiency. So we all know that hydrogen is not a source of energy, as it does not exist in its free form on the planet. Needs to be extracted. Green hydrogen is electrolytic hydrogen that is produced from water, and then that hydrogen can be used to generate power when used with oxygen to produce water. So from the energy viewpoint, the process is really costly. We need more energy to generate that hydrogen than the energy that is produced whenever hydrogen is combined with oxygen. Yet we may not have any other choice but to use it as an energy vector. If we are moving towards electrification, greater electrification, I was about to say mainstream electrification. Well, the problem that we find is that it is difficult to store. No static storage. That's where we do have pumping and double bottom reservoirs. It is very hard, very difficult to store energy in batteries. Significant developments have been made in batteries, yet batteries continue to have little energy units by unit of mass of biomass, and they are very heavy materials to store. So therefore, hydrogen as an energy vector may play a role, for instance, in the aviation sector, and perhaps also in vessel propulsion. I'm not sure whether we will have a role to play as hydrogen gas, because it is difficult to handle. It is combustible. The explosions that Fukushima accident or event were due or caused by the hydrogen that was released due to the high temperatures achieved in the core of the reactor. Yet it is an essential element for synthetic fuels. Hydrogen can play a role as an element or a component to manufacture renewable fuels, synthetic fuels, to be used in niche sectors where it would be otherwise very difficult to electrify. And, well, I'm referring to part of transportation needs here. So you would like to make a comment there? Yes, EU has shown interest in hydrogen, as Berta has said, is trendy. Yet EU is pushing hydrogen. So regarding Chapter 4 and the Caspian area, EU signed a memorandum of understanding with Kazakhstan in El Cairo summit they had last November of December for the development of a electrolytic hydrogen production plan, green hydrogen. As far as I know, there is a German company that is interested in that. The 40 or 50 billion investment were initially discussed. And to my mind, the problem of Caspian area is not the production. Well, they do have water and sun there, yet transportation could be a big challenge, especially we bear in mind that the Caspian area is a closed area, has no exits to the open sea, and transportation continues to be an unresolved problem. As long as, well, but by the time the problem will be resolved, we'll see how this project will progress. I'd like to add that the EU, as we can read on the chapter, when they developed the EU platform, that is to say the European Union platform seeking diversification, which is in line with Recap EU that was released in May, they look for energy efficiency, for energy saving, and diversification. And regarding diversification, regarding the use of clean energy, hydrogen touches upon those two elements. Regarding the EU platform, it's about where to find LNG and gas and hydrogen for the future. Hydrogen topic is found on several places, and it is considered to be a top important topic. And to add to what Cayetano has mentioned, hydrogen does not exist in its free form. Well, with the case of use of hydrogen in fuel cells, starting point is electricity that becomes hydrogen. Hydrogen then at the end of the day becomes electricity, because the fuel cell at the end of the day is an electric engine. So therefore we should think about the performance of each of the processes of yes, we could say that perhaps we could use hydrogen to reduce waste. So for instance, the benchmark of load where there are waste in terms of renewable energies. So having an inefficient system, as at the end of the day there is an overcapacity of renewable energy, so therefore the price becomes zero. Well, the price is zero, but the cost is, well, yes, we could also assume that the cost is zero, but at the end of the day, grounding competitiveness of an element, considering that the input used has a zero price due to inefficiency of the system, this is dubious. And I do think that hydrogen will play a role at a given point in time as a fuel component. And as Cayetano rightly said, well, considering also the storage. So surely there will be other ways of storing hydrogen in the midterm, for instance, pumps and batteries. But there is a cost to that. That comes at a cost. In any case, well, Europe is setting out horizons. There are European initiatives, not only. Well, that is a question for Berta, actually. I will leave it for later on. Okay, I will stop here. Okay, I will finish here. I will add to what has been said here. When we talk about cost, we forget about distribution to the client, to the end user. That's oftentimes why hydrogen will be in an element of a fuel that will reach user. Well, the investment for the logistics to take it to the client is also being made. Okay, we should not forget about the whole chain up until the end user is reached. Europe is making proposals to create a hydrogen market. Well, we even know how to transport it. Well, perhaps a mix of hydrogen and methane will be transported, but that doesn't look like a radical breakthrough. We don't know how it will be transported. We know that pipelines have a challenge in transporting liquid hydrogen. So thinking about creation of hydrogen market in Europe, it is a bit it's unrealistic. And then if we think about capture and sequestration of CO2 to produce blue hydrogen, so the 4 pillars that have been put forward at the EU, notice that the scenario that they have proposed to achieve the stop the or for in terms of climate change and global warming, reforestation. Yes, that has been proposed. Well, everyone has thought about reforestation and also take into consideration greenhouse gases other than methane. So people are kind of confused as the pathway that I have put forward to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and the progress that we have made considering the energy policies that the countries that make up the COP conferences have put forward, we are seeing huge differences despite the optimistic approach of the World Energy Agency. Another question is about opinion about the French nuclear reactor and the weight in the generation of European energy. Well, I think that the question refers to the event that took place last year, where nearly half or over half of the French nuclear reactors were closed down, as they had to undergo a number of maintenance, and they also required some retrofit, and they had to be closed down, and they resolved that by buying energy from neighboring countries, more specifically Spain. Spain was a great importer of energy to France at that time. Spain often imports a bit of energy from France, but also exports some electricity to Morocco and Maghreb. And there is a balance there. And after that event, the nuclear reactors went back into operation. So nuclear power plants have a big problem. They are reaching the end of the life cycle. All of them are reaching the end of the life cycle simultaneously. They will all need to find a solution that requires making technical changes that are decided by the nuclear authorities in each of the countries. Many people thought that the nuclear power plants, due to the tradition they had in France, could be renewed with other nuclear plants. That is questioned. The life cycle of many of them will be extended, but I don't think that many new nuclear power plants will be built. So 3 EPR nuclear reactor is still under manufacturing in Flamanville. There are huge delays, huge budget increases, similar to what happened with Pilot 3 in Finland, which is the first case of third-generation nuclear reactor for France, which is giving headaches due to high costs and big delays. I think that the main problem is not about downtime, but what to do by the time all the nuclear power plants will reach the end of life cycle. Question for Felipe Sánchez Tapia. It is about Turkey. Geopolitical and energy challenges. About Turkey. Well, regarding Turkey, Turkey is a neighbor country So Turkey, within the Caucasian area, has engaged into high-level partnership with Azerbaijan. They define themselves as a single nation, two states. They share language, so there are minor differences between the respective languages, and they have established a very close relationship, and in recent years they have accompanied each other due to the conflict in neighboring area. So, and they have an opposite relationship with Armenia due to historical reasons, Armenian genocide, and the actual Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Turkey has had the border with Armenia closed for many, many years. No diplomatic relationships existed for many years. The situation was very, very challenging. Regarding Georgia, the relationship is cordial. Actually, they have a tripartite relationship, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, which takes into consideration defense, and the latest exercises that they have done are aimed at protecting the pipelines that go through Azerbaijan and Turkey. So Turkey has gained significant weight in recent years in the Caucasian areas, together with Azerbaijan, and to the lower extent with Georgia. That clashes with the aspiration of Europeans, but not with all the Europeans, more specifically France. France is a country that has a close relationship with Armenia, and there has been big tensions between Turkey, France, and also the EU due to those reasons. There are also some potential for cooperation in terms of extension of the pipelines that we mentioned before, if EU wants to increase gas export from Azerbaijan. That would require, most likely, to increase the capacity of pipeline that goes through Panap. And as the Turkey government said, while there is space for cooperation there, Turkey wants to become an energy hub, distribution hub for energy resources, more specifically gas, to Europe. Therefore, there might be a space for cooperation there. In recent years, Turkey has had aggressive foreign policy, not only in the Mediterranean area, but also in the Black Sea area. And in the last 2 years, that has been reconducted since the arrival of Biden president, and has normalized relationships with neighboring countries, Armenia, EU, etc. Ukraine war has appeared as a help, as Turkey has positioned itself as a mediator between Ukraine, EU, Russians. Turkey is playing a significant role that has made it increase its geopolitical weight. And next Sunday, here we have the presidential elections in Turkey. According to polls, the president of Turkey is likely to be renewed. There will be 2 rounds of elections. If none of the candidates will get over more than 50% of the votes, there will be a second round of voting. And it's also an important thing to say about Turkey and the Caucasian area. The opposite candidate said that if he is chosen policy, he will restart the Silk Route, and so that has caused an immediate reaction, and we really need to watch closely to what will happen there if the government of Turkey changes as a result of the elections of next Sunday.
There's another question. I think it's viable. Do you think it's viable in the short term of, not using Russian LNG? I'm not quite sure the question. I'm not sure if anyone wants to answer this, because it's so we can do not use it. Or I think the question is, should we can replace the Russian offer of LNG by something else or another supplier, another country? I'm not quite sure what the question means, but I think in Spain, Europe, our question isn't liquid natural gas. So I'm not quite sure of the question. I don't know if whoever's written it. I don't know if anybody can make some sense of the question that we've received, or anyone wants to make a comment related to LNG. I really don't know the intention behind asking this question, so would anyone like to offer a clarification? Because we haven't been, we haven't really got a problem related to LNG from Russia. Well, I think maybe I have understood it, but I think basically there's no alternative to Russian LNG. What has increased we've bought more LNG from Norway, and more LNG has been bought from the United States and Canada, but they're not in conditions, well, I don't think at the moment, to replace the LNG that come from Russia. We can reduce the amount we buy from Russia, but I don't think we can replace it fully. Well, I'm not sure if it's more commercial question. Is it related to the prices? I'm not quite sure. But anyway, there has been a considerable reduction, and according to data from February, from the year 2023, the exports of LNG, or liquefied gas from Russia, but it's a very small amount. I think the data is 1.5 BCM, so it's a very minor amount. So I don't think it's an issue at all. So I think that would be easy to replace. So I think that's the only thing I could say with regard to this. I think it's an insignificant amount that we import of LNG from Russia. Okay, Berta. So what about the incentives related to the development of renewables in Europe compared to, I don't know, other places like the United States? Well, that's one of my favorite questions to answer. Well, the policies are very different. Here we're focusing everything on regulatory goals, specific goals, and we focus a lot on explaining, or so rather than having a specific amount of CO2 emissions, what we need to do is to see how it can be done rather than the exact amounts. And as far as aids, well, depending on the country in the European Union, they're very different. Germany, for example, offers a lot of incentives to synthetic production. In Spain, there is no subsidies related to renewables like biomethane and hydrogen. They've been excluded from all the different subsidies available. In the United States, the focus is completely different. They can't promote any initiative that is focused on this emissions reductions related to transport and other sectors. And it's technology, it's neutral. So there are lots of capture and storage programs for CO2 and sustainable fuels for aviation, and I think they're really taking off now. So I think it's more promoted in incentivating rather than to forbid. But now in Europe, we try to control rather than prohibit. So what we're asking is, can we have a framework that we can work for and develop different alternatives? Because everything changes so much that, it's very difficult for the regulators, for a regulator that has to write in real detail all the different directives without knowing on a daily basis what's happening to technology. It's very difficult for them. So the probabilities that they make a mistake or something isn't taken into account is very, very high. So we want to ensure that the emissions are reduced. But I think we need to have an open framework to exactly define how we can reduce the emissions. Thank you very much, Berta. This question is for Cayetano about whether it's possible to replace the weight that Russia has as far as the conversion and the enriching of nuclear energy. So we can include this in any of the sanctions that are being implemented. Everyone talks about the supply of Russian gas, but actually when we're talking about the nuclear energy, I think it's 40% of the nuclear fuel or nuclear energy. So We haven't, as far as I know, as far as sanctions, they haven't contemplated the nuclear energy. Well, the problem with the nuclear energy or enriched uranium, we don't need a continuous flow. In a nuclear power plant, when it's opened, you have fuel for 10 years approximately. And then the recharges are every year and a half, every 2 years, something like that. So you don't need a continuous flow. And so these sort of things are not seen as much. I think it would be very difficult to replace it because it's true that Russia is a very important player in the enriching of uranium. So when we're talking about the manufacture of the fundamental element for nuclear energy, so we've got a company which makes the nuclear fuel, but it imports the raw material, which is the enriched uranium. The main supplier is France, but Russia has a very important role there. Well, the question, what role should nuclear energy play in Spain? No. So, Cayetano, do you want to talk about this? Well, I think it depends a lot on several different things. To start, it depends on the geographical context. I think that in the Western world, the United States and Europe, the future of nuclear energy is relatively limited. And I think that it is reduced to the energy transition period. During the energy transition period, it's fundamental to maintain this type of power plants. But of course, once we expand, I'm not sure when, the generation systems for renewable energies, etc. Well, of course, it will be it will be reduced even further. But of course, China, India, and the Western Europe, they continue to build nuclear power plants. And I think that nuclear energy there has a horizon that is a more long-term, with a more long-term view. And in the future, on the much longer term, I don't know. But as Keynes said, for the future, everything is based on calculations. I agree with Cayetano. Well, I think when we talk about the future of the role of nuclear energy, we have to make a difference between, as he said, the countries. And this is very important, which is there are two countries that have changed their strategy to reduce the nuclear weight, which is South Korea and Japan. They had reduced it, and now they've changed their policy. But it's true to say that in Europe, except France, for obvious reasons of industrial policies in France, because they have a lot of nuclear energy, so they're talking about first of the canned reactors. Well, we're talking about the tariff, which is related to the French technology for the next 35 years, like Flammable, as an example. The current prices, the wholesale prices for electricity are low, but we have a long-term view. It's an amazing amount. So maybe this has to be changed. So Flammable, I think they have, obviously the tariff in France is completely out of the market, but the third generation only makes sense. It's in countries like France because of their nuclear policies. And what about the other countries that have nuclear weapons? So, to have nuclear power plants and then you have nuclear weapons, well, it's very questionable. So, anyway, to develop, well, actually for Spain, third generation reactors make no sense whatsoever. If the French actually manage to have the cost that they say they have, like Finland, for example, well, fantastic, because they said, right, you tell me that in 60 years you're going to have an average price of 20 euros megawatt hour. Well, then, of course, then we will do, change and use that sort of energy. But those who have invested in that, well, they did very well because all the all the risks related to the deviation in price, etc., is the responsibility of the French. But regardless, it's very questionable this will actually happen. So when the French say one thing and then we have the Chinese say they're going to have 5 megawatts a year, well, if they do that, they're gigawatts a year, then they'll be able to change that. But anyway, the increase in the lifespan of the second generation power plants, well, that's going to be around 40 years. So if there are no security problems, it makes sense. And in fact, in the United States, of the 93 reactors they have, 88 have been given a license to go from up to 60 years of lifespan. So extending the life of 40 to 50 years, well, from the cost standpoint, well, I can't remember the name of the document that backs this up, but they were talking about the different costs of all the different generation prices. They think that the cost associated to extending the life for 10 or 20 years of these nuclear power plants, I think the cost will be between 30, 40 euros megawatt hour. With that cost, it's highly competitive with any alternative renewable energy. So therefore, you have to add to that. And when we're talking about the French, to substitute one technology with a 90% of reliability to other factors, where this has a backup cost, well, the French, they are trying to balance the different alternatives when we talk about these load factors. So when we're talking about extending the life of these power plants, it's highly competitive. Also, we have to take into account that the alternatives isn't just nuclear, it can be gas. So there's a factor that needs to be taken into account, and which is an environmental factor. Anyway, as far as it concerns us, we should have to think about using third-generation nuclear reactors. I really don't think, as far as we're concerned, it makes any sense whatsoever. One thing is France and all the countries that have got nuclear weapons, and the Japanese and the Koreans. Well, if they have 3-generation reactors and the price is between 50 and 60 euros megawatts hour, well, nobody knows how they actually get this cost, or this, and we don't know whether it's realistic. Even the Chinese say it's about 60. So they think the cost will be about 60 euros megawatt hour. And no one can explain how the same technologies has one price for the Japanese and it's viable, and it isn't for the French. So, and it says that the Chinese are actually copying the French technology. So it makes no sense whatsoever. Well, anyway, I think I think we've managed to cover all the questions.
No, creo que ya no queda ninguna.
Yes, I don't think we have any questions left. So thank you very much, Trevor, for being there in Calgary, listening to us, thousands of kilometers away, and we're glad that you could follow our debate. Well, and what's the time there in Calgary? What's your local time? So we're very grateful. I don't know if it's the middle of the night or you had to get up at very early time, or maybe you're going to go to bed now, Trevor. So anyway, regardless, thank you very much.
Here to join you today. It's about 4 a.m.
Oh.
Bueno.
Wow, they're saying. Well, it would have been better not to go to bed at all, rather than going out on the town and then listening to us. Everyone in the room is laughing. Anyway, thank you all very much for your attention today. And as I say, you will all have access to the hard copy version of our report. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos.
Well, thank you all very much for being here yet another year. I would like to remind you that you get a hard copy. So, as we say, you get a hard copy as you leave the room, or you can download it from our website. And we have a coffee outside where we can do some networking. Well, thank you all very much. I'd like to especially thank 3 people, both from the Institute and the Repsol team and Inner Club, because it would be impossible to mention everybody's name. But I want to make 3 special mention. One from the Coronel Vicente Nagi, and as I say, yet again, thanks to Inner Club and Repsol and the people representing them for having organized this event and helping us with the drafting of this report. Thank you.